So thank you to the organizers. Let me begin. Let me mention that this is joint work with the co-authors you see listed here. And let me just start with the main motivation of the paper, which is about measuring international R&D spillovers. And so these, and more specifically in terms of these spillovers, what we're really going to focus on is the trade channel connecting these spillovers of R&D, of technology. More specifically for us, it's going to be about patents. And we're going to do that by really leveraging some micro level data about about the specifics of the technology, which firms have which patents, which inventors and which locations are citing those patents, and relating that to the export pattern of those specific firms. So just as a very brief idea, we're going to be able to observe when these are going to be for French firms, when a French firm enters a given foreign market, and we're going to be able to observe when, if and when, foreign inventors in that location introduce new patents citing the patent of this new exporter. And so the key question for us is to think about these spillovers and to see when this is going to represent a causal outcome. And then I'm going to talk just a little bit about answering some additional questions about whether some firms generate more of these spillovers than others, and whether some destinations attract more spillovers than others. So how do we do this? So at the data level, I kind of hinted at the type of data that we're going to use. We're going to combine production data on French firms with customs data, so we can see exactly where and when these French firms export. And then we're going to combine this on the receiving end of this potential spillover through trade with worldwide patents in all of these destinations during those same years. So we're going to link essentially these the patents of these French firms with new patents in this destination. These patents in the destinations we're going to call a spillover. We're going to think of a spillover link when a new patent in this destination is citing specifically the patent of this French firm. So I'll often talk about these citations. When I say the citations, it's actually a new patent, a new innovation, but it's one that is specifically referencing another innovation, a patent by a French exporter. And so we're going to estimate this causal effect of a French firm's entry into a new export market on these new citing patents. This is what we're going to call the causal technology spillover from French exporters. Just to give you a brief preview of the results, we find a positive effect that lasts several years in the export destination. And I'll show you that the bulk of the effect is at the extensive margin, which means the exporter patent is cited for the first time. And in any event, this impact, even if it isn't at the extensive margin, it is an initial increase in citations for a patent that is not cited very much. These are not super cited patents that are cited even more after the entry by the exporter. And I'll show you some evidence that this effect is concentrated in countries with an intermediate level of development. So I'm going to go very quickly over the literature given the limited time. So there's been a lot of work on these types of linkages outside of the trade and outside of the R&D spillover and trade literature. I'm just mentioning some here. One methodology that we're going to adopt is closely related to this paper by Watzinger, which was developed to analyze the spillovers generated by the mobility of scientists. There's also, of course, as you all know, an extensive literature on knowledge spillovers and trade. Um, uh, uh, there was this very influential paper by Cohen Helpman, kind of showing empirically the extent of these R&D spillovers. And then there's been a lot of work that has done this with just stocks of R&D. So this is mainly research progressing by measuring technology in terms of R&D, not with patent data. There's also been a ton of work with patent data. I'm just mentioning this, this here. I want to make sure to mention for some of you, if you're listening, when I say patent data but no citations, I'm not talking about the papers. I'm talking about the fact that patent data was used, but the spillover was not measured explicitly by looking at the citations to those patents. And then lastly, there has also been some work at the aggregate level between aggregate stocks of patents and aggregate citations that you see here. And of course, what we're going to do is just move down one level of disaggregation and really link the trade pattern of a single firm with its citation in a particular destination market. Let me first show you what kind of data you get just from the aggregate, from the aggregate part. So what you see here is this is for France. You just see a gravity type specification where you see as a function of both distance from France and the size of the destination. You see this very strong aggregate pattern in terms of the response of the aggregate stock of citations that are citing the patents of French firms. And so we see that bigger destinations are attracting more citations by French firms, as well as distance from France having this usual negative relationship here. Now, of course, there are tons of things here that cannot be controlled for. In particular, we think that there are a lot of different channels and a lot of different variables that can affect both the trade pattern of French firms as well as patenting activity in the destination. And so the key is going to be trying to control for that and trying to come up with measuring a causal link. Let me give you one more picture of the data just based on the aggregate, but this time narrowing the focus a little bit more on what we're going to measure, which is specifically the extensive margin of trade, so the entry of French firms into an export market. And let me at least wipe out destination-specific fixed effects by just showing you growth rates. And these are going to be growth rates over the period of the rest of the data that I'm going to show you, which is 1995 to 2012. So in this heat map, what you see is the growth rate of the extensive margin, the entry of French exporters across all these different countries in the world. And we can correlate that with the growth rate of citations. And again, I'm using this, this word citations. When I say citations, I mean new patents developed in these destinations. These are going to be patents that cite a patent by a French firm. And so you see that there is this synchronization also in terms of these two growth rates. And if I put it together on a map, you see them here. If we run this very simple regression of the citations on the growth in exporters in that destination, we get a coefficient that is very, very highly significant. So again, still we're at this aggregate level where there's still a lot of things that we're not controlling for. At least we have the country fixed effects here, but we're not controlling for anything time varying that can affect both the change in the trade patterns as well as the increase in innovation at the destination. And so this is a key thing that we want to address in this paper. So let me just describe the data very briefly. So I already described the number of years of data that we have. Here are the number of destinations that these French firms are entering into. Here are the firms. So these are firms that have at least one patent that can be cited somewhere. And it has to be a firm that enters at least one export destination in during the period of our sample. So for firms that enter prior to that, and we don't see any further entry, we just don't know at what year the firms first started exporting and at what year to first try to record the potential spillover. So we're limiting ourselves to firms that enter some export markets during our sample year. Here are the number of patents that these firms have recorded. Now, if you've worked with patent data, you'll know that this patent data is incredibly skewed. So it's going to be very skewed towards a few of these firms are going to have tons of patent. Most of the firms are going to have just a single patent. These patents have accounted for new patents in these destinations, again, what I'm calling citations, which you see here. So roughly roughly 3-to-1 ratio between the two. I'm going to talk a lot about these firm destination links. There's a lot of ways of measuring kind of the untreated one. So let me just kind of focus on the treated one. So a link is a link between a French exporter and a destination. And so we have 13,462 of these where we see a French firm with at least one patent enter a destination. And so we're going to, part of this is going to look at these, essentially these treated links and ask whether those are going to generate, relative to all the other links, more of a response of innovation, of new patents, these new patents citing that French firm's patent in that destination at that point in time. So I'm going to introduce to you two econometric frameworks that we're going to use to really get at this causal outcome from trade, the entry of this French exporter into an export destination, to the spillover, the technology spillover, the new patents in the destination, citing that French firm's patent. The first one is going to be one that really focuses on firm year fixed effects. And so just to kind of give you the intuition for that, all of these French firms at any given period of time t, we're going to observe all the sequential pattern of destinations that this firm has entered in. And so it's entered country 1 a little bit earlier. It will be entering country 2 a little bit later. It will never export to country 3. And actually, I can put another country kind of in this baseline where we see it always exporting to country, to a fourth country. And so the idea, the intuition for the within firm specification is to focus on this firm at time t. And just to say that regardless of the amount of citations that this firm is getting at that particular time t, which clearly depends on the firm's current stock of patents, its current innovation, whether the distribution of new patents around the world is going to be correlated to this pattern of entry. And so in particular, at time t, do we see, relative to the total number of new patents citing this French firm's existing patents, are there more of those citations that come from country 1 that the firm has just entered relative to other countries? So you'll see this in as the standard kind of distributed lag specification. We can also check for pre-trend effects. So we can ask the question whether we see citations by inventors in country 2 ahead at time t, ahead of this French firm's entry into country 2. And we can always measure that relative to all of the citations, all of the new patents that are citing this French firm, which includes countries such as country 3 and this hypothetical country 4 that I just mentioned. So here is this econometric specification in terms of the equation. We're going to measure, and this is something that we're still looking at, we're going to measure patent responses in a lot of different ways. So we clearly want to measure patents that represent new technologies. And so we're looking at different ways of specifying those patents, sometimes as what are called triadic patents, which are the patent is important enough that it's registered both in Europe, in the US, and in Asia. At other times, we're going to focus on specific patents that are called priority patents, which are meant to be new inventions that are not related to current patents that the firm already knows. I just want you to think of these as not just a patent of a firm has a patent somewhere in the world, and it is just responding by protecting that similar technology somewhere else in the world. So these are ones that we're measuring in a way that we really want to capture new innovations by the firm. And so we're going to use this distributed lag type of specification that is going to be related to the entry by this French firm F in destination G at a particular time t, at a particular time t, centered around the period of a French firm entry. So the key within firm specification that I mentioned is going to be having this effect, this fixed effect here, which is a fixed effect for all of the citations that the firm is, the firm is receiving at that particular time t. And throughout, we're always going to have this control here for all of the citations that is occurring in destination J. And we tried either like sector level definitions or technology patent class definitions for this fixed effect in time t. So this control here is for anything that can explain an increase in innovation activity in destination J at time t that is in a sector or a patent class related to the patents that this French exporter may be introducing. And then I'll show you some specification where we add one additional fixed effect, which is we try to control for the fact that this French firm may have very special linkages to specific destinations. And so in addition to that, we are going to introduce another fixed effect to control for anything that is non-time varying, but that is highlighting the importance of particular link between a destination for a particular French firm. And so here you see kind of this baseline specification. So again, 0 here is the time of export market entry for this French firm. We can measure these pre-trends very much along the line of the intuition that I just mentioned before. Do we see the citations in destinations peak prior to the firm entering? And we don't see any evidence of that. And what we do see is this delayed over time response of innovation, of new patents citing this French exporters, starting 4 or 5 years after this French firm enters the export market. I should mention that the bars that you see, the thicker bar is a 95% confidence interval, and the thinner bar is a 99% interval. So this is kind of one of our basic results that say that 4 or 5 years after the entry of a firm into a particular destination market, we see new patents in that destination increase. And this is relative to, again, this is within firm years, so it's relative to whatever set of citations that French firm is receiving in any particular year. We can also do that controlling for that firm destination link. That's that additional control that I showed you there. And we see similar, if not even stronger results. Again, this peak 4 or 5 years after the French firm enters a particular destination. So this is one specification. The major thing that we can't control for this, of course, is we can't control for anything that is varying over time at the firm destination, at both the firm destination level. So these are firm year fixed effects with the firm destination link being fixed in time. I also wanted to show you a specification where we try to control for something that could be time varying between the firm F and the destination J. So clearly we can't put in a dummy variable for every firm destination year, in which case we would lose all of the variation that we have on the patent response side. But what we can do is try to control for that in a different way, and to control for that by grouping essentially firms together into probability bins, where these firms have a very similar probability of entering that particular destination market J in that year T. And so this is something that's very similar to some of the other literature that, for example, this paper I mentioned before that looked at the mobility of scientists and tried to see whether there were these kind of spillovers based on the movement of scientists looking at the future, the future research pattern. And so this is just going to be this kind of control, again, that is going to be time varying for a particular firm F and at the destination level J. So let me kind of show you first same kind of intuition as before. This is the same, as you recognize, it's the same graph that I showed you before. Now I'm calling these firms instead of countries. So here the idea is at time T, I have a whole bunch of firms that have the same probability of entering a given market J in year T. We have this method of probability bins. I won't kind of describe that in detail. When we use that, we obtain very similar results in terms of this peak of patents in this destination J. So just to move very quickly, I'm not going to have time to talk about a lot of the ways we try and really infer that this is a causal interpretation. Let me just mention one, which is kind of a placebo test where we randomize the year of market entry for a French firm. So the main idea is, would we have seen this patent response in the destinations for this French firm if regardless of whether the French firm had actually started exporting to that destination? And so we can run all of these permutations, and what we find is that the coefficient that we measure for the response either 4 years after or 5 years after is way outside this range of distribution, showing that the answer to the question of would this French firm have received those citations had it not entered that particular market, I think can be clearly answered in the negative. We try alternate functional form. Let me just kind of show you that, as I mentioned before, we see a very, very strong response at the extensive margin, which is this binary indicator of the firm getting its first citation. Another way to kind of measure this, and I don't have time now to talk about this specification, is to break down the new citations that the firm is getting into how many new citations is the firm getting. And for the bulk of these firms, the strongest effects, which we measure here, are the firms just getting an extra 1 or 2 citations. This is not driven by an effect where some super cited patents get tons more citations. And so let me just show you 2 graphs that show that we don't see very much of a difference in terms of the spillover effects across a productivity distribution of firm. It is increasing, but you have to squint really hard to see this kind of increase. And we also look at whether some destinations generate more of these spillovers than others. And here we see very clearly a pattern where we don't see these kind of spillovers occurring in destinations representing the bottom 30, say, percentile of the distribution of GDP per capita among the destination. And we do clearly see some evidence of a hump shape where these spillover effects tend to be concentrated in countries in the upper middle of the distribution of country incomes. So let me skip this. Quantification, I'll just summarize the coefficients just by saying that these represent substantial increases in citation rates, both at the intensive and the extensive margin. So kind of translating those coefficients to something that we can interpret. 39% increase in citation over an 8-year period overall, and at the extensive margin, over 50% more likely to obtain that first citation. And so let me then wrap up, which is just to come back to my the initial motivation, which is that we really wanted to identify this causal link between trade and technology spillovers, and we aim to measure that by looking at the very specific export market entry pattern of these French firms and only measuring the innovation responses of patents that are directly related to the patents that this French, to the technology that this French exporter has. And that we find these sizable effects that last for a long time, starting 4 or 5 years after export market entry, and that this spillover effect is concentrated in destinations above the 30th percentile of the GDP per capita distribution of GDP per capita. So thank you very much, and apologies for wrapping that up very quickly.
So Mark, thank you very much. I hope you have a pen and paper. Let me ask you the first set of questions.
Sure.
So there is a question from Mathieu Parenti and Richard Forslit. What about FDI? Could this be exports to subsidiaries? Can you control for time varying M&E activity? Another question, whether firms are exporting final goods or intermediates. And then Victor Slavchev is asking whether you can distinguish between self-made citations and those added by patent examiners.
Great. All very good questions. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. So these are all things that we have thought about and are thinking about looking at. So FDI, what we see is that the firms do have some FDI linkages. The issue with FDI is it's really hard. A lot of these are based on the exact timing of entry, and we don't have anything about the exact timing of entry for this FDI link. So even though several of these firms that are exporting may have FDI links in the destination, what we observe is that the spillover occurs, the timing of it occurs right around the first trading relationship. which is not to say that an FDI link between these two firms is not important, but we're relying on that timing dimension, which is the timing of the export market entry. Intermediates, we're trying to do more with that. We strongly believe that these spillovers are particularly high when firms are in a vertical relationship, whether it's actually an FDI relationship or not, and we're trying to kind of measure that in more detail. And we are looking at separating kind of self-citations from, well, not just self-citations, we're looking a lot at separating out the bulk of citations. We separated out the citations that have been added by the examiner. But the one issue that we have is because we're dealing with patents from lots of different patent offices, the way that they classify these different types of citations is very different across the different countries. So we're looking at fine-tuning them by the institution that is awarding the patent. But if we use a classification in PADSTAT and we exclude the examiner's added citations, we get very much the same results. But it's not excluding that many citations just based on kind of the filters that PADSTAT is applying to that. I should also mention that one other thing we are looking at, it's also related to FDI, is we're looking at also citations to any firms that are in the same ownership group. And we do find that there are large responses within the ownership group, but the bulk of that is explained by the citations to the firm that is actually doing the exporting.
Thank you, Mark. Agnes wanted to ask a question. So Agnes, if you could do so, you should be unmuted now.
Okay, many thanks. Thanks for this very nice presentation. Actually, I had a question about the policy implications of this research. So if you think that all countries follow the same pattern with these technology spillovers of exports, then since France has a trade deficit, it should import foreign technology more than export its own technology. But then the US also has a huge trade deficit. So, and this is not new. So how do you reconcile with the power of US technology? And China also has a large surplus. And would it be a motivation for some mercantilist policies? Because you have this very nice data about exports, but if you had data about domestic trade, wouldn't you find the same kind of spillovers within the same country? So what is special in trade, in international trade with respect to internal trade? Thank you.
So Mark, 1 minute.
1 minute, okay. Let me start very quickly with the last part of it. I don't want to say that there's anything special about the international link that may not happen with a domestic link. This is purely about the econometric measurement and isolation of that link. So we would think very much so that if, for example, this trade is related to a vertical trade, for example, for an intermediate good, we would think that it would also happen between domestic producers. And in fact, there's new research going on for the US that shows that there is very much this link between suppliers and buyers, even when they're both in the US. This is just purely our way of econometrically identifying that link. Just relating that to the trade balance, what I want to be very clear is that this is not based on the volume of trade that is causing it, right? What we're really looking at is these kind of individual extensive margins, for which the responses are incredibly heterogeneous. So it's not clear that you can aggregate from that to get a relationship between the volume or even the net volume of trade and the full measure of spillovers that are coming from that. I guess the policy implications would be more to the extent that we see a lot of firms in terms of just reorganizing their supply chains into much more kind of local versions of that, is that there would be a prediction for lower knowledge flows around the world based on these types of much more local reconfigurations of supply chains.
Thank you very much, Mark.